Okay, so I think we're about time to get the ball rolling this afternoon. We'll wait one more minute to allow more people to come in, and then we will get started. And good afternoon to everyone. I see some people saying good morning, but I guess it is good morning depending on where you are. Yes, good morning to our West Coast people. Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar of the Power Series. We are so excited that you're able to tune in. My name is Tyreek Daniels, and I am the founder and executive director of What's in the Mirror. We are a healing justice social movement that provides mental health awareness and suicide prevention to communities of color through art, advocacy, and affirming care, with the focus on women, youth, and LGBTQIA+ persons. Today, and for the next 3 months, What's in the Mirror is partnering with the Black AIDS Institute to bring you sessions linking race, gender identity, HIV health, and mental health in a way that empowers us and moves us to advocate for one another and ourselves. Today, I am joined by Robert Soto, social justice activist and educator. So with that being said, we're going to turn the session over to Robert for his expertise. He will share a few words about HIV criminalization and mass incarceration. And then we have a Q&A period. Please feel free to ask questions using our Q&A feature located at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And so without further ado, Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tariq, and hello to everyone that's gathered this morning, this afternoon, depending on whichever coast you are on, and all of that and in between in the country. I'm glad to be here today during this summer and taking this time out of my busyness to do this. I'm sort of been in transition, so I'm really happy to make some time to do this today with people that I like and organizations that I have much respect for. So yeah, if we can bring up my presentation, I'll go ahead and get into it. All right, so being that I don't have a lot of time, there will be some things that I may not cover. So just roll with me. And if you have questions relating to something I've not gone over particularly, you can definitely feel free to ask it and I'll try to get you an answer as best as I possibly can. What else could I say on this? Yeah, so brief time, but I will cover as much as I possibly can. And hopefully that you will learn something that you didn't know this time. I know many may be familiar with HIV criminalization from many sessions that you may have heard it from, but each time you learn something that you might not have heard before. So just roll with me and let's just have a discussion today. So decriminalizing HIV, something I know a little bit all too well, considering my own lived experience of HIV criminalization in 2009 when I was convicted. And since my release from prison 10 years ago, this year, I have dedicated myself to this issue and learning more about it and working with people who were just as passionate and cared enough about people, but also the fact of how this issue impacts a lot of people. And so I'm glad to see there are some folks that are a part of this that I feel like I'm amongst community. And so it feels good to be able to talk about it. So decriminalizing HIV, I wanted to, well, you can advance the slide. Yeah. So it's important to see that HIV criminalization here in the United States, this is just a map from the Center for HIV Law and Policy that sort of gives you a snapshot of what HIV criminalization laws look like across the country. Now, recently, there have been several states that have modified their laws, such as Illinois, Virginia, Missouri, and Michigan, Washington, California, Colorado, Iowa, and in some instances, North Carolina. Texas has done some work around eradicating their law in that state. And there are many more states that have been fortunate to introduce legislation, if not have modified their law, but at least introduce legislation to address the issue in their state. And that is something that is from work that's been done, at least since I've gotten involved back in 2012. So almost technically 10 years, and we've seen a lot change, a lot have happened, a lot of growth, a lot of momentum build in this HIV decriminalization movement, and it's continuing to grow, and we're continuing to learn new things as each state goes through their own sort of process of modernizing their law. Each state is different in terms of how they're able to approach it. It's, you know, it depends on their political reality that's going on in their state. Depends on how far you might get. And these actions or these initiatives can take a number of years. But just in recent years, they seem to be increasing. However, modernizing is about as far we can get in most cases, because they're saying repeal was not, I guess, accepted in the beginnings, but a lot of modernization has been going on. And so some states have been quite successful in that. But the point that I wanted to make up around modernization is that sometimes the law may not turn out, the outcome may not be the best. And so you do what you can within the time that you have and with the people that you're working with. They're on the ground as well as at those state legislators. These are state laws, and this is not a federal law, but laws that are state laws. So you have states with HIV specific criminal laws, and then you have states with that prosecute people living with HIV under non-HIV specific general criminal laws. And so if you can see with the coloring there, the dark red for the HIV specific criminal laws, and then the dark orange for states that have prosecuted people living with HIV under non-HIV specific general criminal laws. And then you have the light sort of orange, if you will, for states that do sentence enhancements, which are applicable to people who are living with HIV that may either be injecting drug users or sex workers. And if they happen to be found to be HIV positive at the time that they're arrested, it's possible that they could face sentence enhancement. So you see some of those states that have either one or the other or two or of the combinations of the colorings there. I myself was prosecuted in Louisiana. So as you can see, they have an HIV specific law there, as well as they have prosecuted people under general criminal laws. Also, it's 6 states may require registration as a sex offender. So that is possibly a requirement. Some states that have been fortunate to change their laws have been able to get that sort of out of the way in terms of people who are facing possible convictions that they may avoid having to register as a sex offender. And so if you're following sex offender laws, they can, you can be on the registry for a lifetime, for 25 years, 10 years, 15 years. It just varies from state to state. So I just wanted everyone to sort of see this as a snapshot of where HIV criminalization is in the United States, and understand when I'm speaking of HIV criminalization for someone that's looking for that definition, it is where the criminal law is applied to only people living with HIV. It's only to people living with HIV, which in my opinion is discriminating in itself, for non-disclosure, for perceived exposure, and possibly transmission of HIV. So these are some of the instances of how under what circumstance a person may be charged or arrested, either because they did not disclose their status prior to engaging in any type of sexual activity or any type of sexual behavior. So next slide. Okay, so basic understanding of HIV criminalization laws, which I should have mentioned this on the other state. You've seen basically a snapshot of what the states are. Usually we say about 30 states have these laws, but depending on how you're looking at the laws, whether you're looking at specific laws or looking at laws, states that have laws that they've prosecuted under general criminal laws, the number could vary. But since we've had states that modernized their laws recently, the 30 number kind of falls a little bit. So, but you saw the map. That's kind of a general sense of what the laws look like and how many states we have. But some basic understanding of HIV criminal laws is that they do not require criminal intent. Meaning if you're a person living with HIV, you engage in sexual activity and you are accused of not disclosing your status, that is pretty much all you need to have to be liable and to be possibly arrested. So it doesn't require criminal intent. You could just basically be living your life and enjoying, the pleasures of life and your desires. And if you're HIV positive, sometimes that can, that will complicate matters between two individuals. But understand that just because a person does not disclose their status doesn't mean that they're trying to commit a crime. It's just that because there are laws that pertain to only people living with HIV, that, if you are just doing regular things like other people are doing, that if you're positive, it just makes it a different, your outcome could be different in terms of how you are engaged or the behaviors that that you are allowed to do as a person living with HIV under the law. It's a lesser known felony law. Not many people, one, are aware of HIV criminalization, and then they don't know that it's actually a felony, which carries a lot of weight in this country. Felony on your record stays with you for a lifetime unless you're able to get that removed. But those things are very challenging. So many people don't know that it's a felony law and with felony laws does require some may require some jail or prison time. Or if you're lucky, you may get a probated sentence. There's no consideration of science. That's why we are doing the work of bringing awareness about these laws, because they do not reflect the science. And in other words, explaining the risk and routes of HIV transmission. And so the laws pretty much are just, if you're living with HIV, you are not allowed to do this. We want, to stop transmission. This is their idea of trying to stop transmission of HIV. These laws have been around since late 80s, early 90s. And understand this, with all that's happened over the past 40 years, none of these laws have really been looked at until the past, 10, maybe 15, 20 years or so. But in most recent, they've not been really looked at. And that's why this movement exists, to bring awareness to that, because they just made the laws and, treatment got better. And so that changed the landscape of HIV to as we know it today. People are living longer and healthier lives. However, they never went back, the legislators never went back to review these laws to think whether they were necessary. So just wanted to make that a point, because many people, the fact that we have the laws, many people would assume that, oh my God, HIV is dangerous, HIV is scary, that anybody living with HIV, oh my God, you got to watch out for them. The people have not that put these laws in place. They've made, I don't know if some of them are even still living today, but for those that are currently in these state legislators, they need to be taking time to looking at going back and reviewing their criminal codes and looking at HIV more specifically. These laws do not take into account, therefore, they do not take into account condoms, PrEP, or U equals U, or even whether the virus was transmitted. Many of these cases that we hear about in the media, there is not much known about the actual transmission, the fact that HIV has been transmitted. It's only the fact that this person has been identified as living with HIV, and this whomever, the partner, whoever is saying that they did not disclose, and therefore this person now, their face is all across the media. So that's that point. But rarely do they ever go back to say, oh yes, this person in fact transmitted HIV to an individual. But again, they do not take into account of condoms, PrEP, or U equals U. And so we have many great advancements now in HIV to where at least this is reasons why we don't need the laws as we do, as we have them today because we have these advancements. And the thing is, these advancements have not been taken into consideration, which is why we're doing the work. But they're slowly now becoming, in the discussions, in the negotiations, in the debates with legislators, and as well as within the community about just how effective this is and what's the, is this necessary to continue to have these laws? And so these are the reasons why we fight and address this issue, because of the advancements in treatment, the advancements in science. And we just need the powers that be to pay attention to us and pay attention to these advancements and not simply ignore them. And my last point here was that they do more harm. These laws do more harm than good, particularly when it comes to public health and our public safety, because that is the reason why this narrative, that why the laws exist in the first place, because it's about public safety. And they have, left it up to public health to do the prevention work. However, the criminal law has somehow got its hands in it. And so therefore, public health strategies are not as effective, or they become punitive, which, as we all understand, you can't do prevention and prosecution. You can't do both. It's either one or the other. And we also understand that obviously these laws have not been effective at stopping the transmission of HIV, because people are continuing to contract HIV, but not simply because people are being criminals. It's because, as we understand, there's structural issues that cause people to fall into this space of where they're susceptible to contracting HIV. And of course, that's a whole nother story within itself, but that's pretty much the gist of what I'm speaking to, is that a lot of this is structural, and not because people are just criminals. No one wants HIV so that they can be labeled a criminal. No one wants either of that. So next slide. So 40 years into the epidemic, many of you have probably been following a lot of these different things that have come out, because we've kind of reached a milestone in this year. And so I wanted to just sort of bring this together with highlighting, just emphasizing, just kind of 40 years into the epidemic, what is the HIV looking like, and what is sort of the landscape for mass incarceration, or the likelihood of people being incarcerated. And so these are just some statistics that I pulled from the CDC, as well as the Sentencing Project. So since the first AIDS cases were reported in 1981 in LA and New York City, the southern region of the US has become the epicenter of the HIV epidemic. And I'm focusing on the South, particularly because I'm from the South, and because of my experience of contracting HIV as a young Black gay man in the South, as well as my criminalization in the South as well. Southern states today account for an estimated 51% of new HIV cases annually. So among MSMs, the number of new diagnoses, 1 in 2 Black African American, or 1 in 4 Hispanic, Latino, gay, or bisexual, or same gender loving men may be diagnosed with HIV in their lifetime. As I said, as a product of the South, I wasn't aware of the statistics at the time when I learned about my HIV status. So just to see this data and understand this is like, wow, well, considering how things are structured, no wonder I sort of would fall into that I call it a trap. I call it a trap, because why would we have structures in a way that people will automatically be subjected to harm or even risk? And so in this instance, HIV, so it's bound to happen with looking at these numbers. It's bound to happen to someone. 1 in 2. That's scary. Also in the U.S. The U.S. is the world leader in incarceration. A 500% increase, you all, over the last 40 years. That is crazy. 500% increase. That is crazy. That's almost like so. Before I just go off the handle there, the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment of U.S. residents born in 2001, if you're a Black man, is 1 in 3, and Latinx men is 1 in 6. So with me coming from Louisiana, which is known as, the state with the highest incarceration rate in the world, again, it's a trap for Black men, particularly, or Black people, men and women. Uh, and so again, it's a trap that it's a likely that no wonder I would face prosecution because of, again, um, Black men 1 in 3 um, would find themselves incarcerated. And so when you put them both together, in my opinion, that's where HIV criminalization is like the perfect storm. And so I wanted to just highlight this because the epidemic is so prevalent in the South. And then you layer that with the prosecution, with the laws there, how people are incarcerated. I mean, what do you expect to happen? You know, so I just wanted to let that sink in, because a lot of those Southern states have not modernized their laws yet. They still have them on the books. They're still felonies. But thank God there are coalitions on the ground in those states that are trying their hardest to do that work to change that. So this is because existing structural and institutional racism, it is true. I believe it is true. Cultural conservatism and religious intolerance infect all aspects of our society. And this is the first time I ever said the word infect in my presentations, because mostly when we associate with HIV, we say infect. But in this case, I use the word infect because it does. Racism, cultural conservatism, religious intolerance infect all aspects of our society, particularly the criminal legal system and the public health system. Next slide. So I wanted to just highlight some of the experiences that happens among Black LGBTQIA plus, as well as people with HIV. Some people are not living with HIV, and yet because they are identified, have a queer identity, that they can be subjected to these experiences as well, even before HIV. And so, of course, if you're both, you just get hit on all sides based on your identity. And I know some of us have our salient identities, and so just depending on how you see yourself, you may or may not, or how you're socialized in life, you may or may not have some of these experiences, but nonetheless, these kind of things are happening. So I just wanted to highlight some of those. So who are we talking about? We're talking about people that come from socially and politically vulnerable communities. There are people living with and affected by HIV frequently, already face multiple intersections of stigma and discrimination, even before HIV. Historically and present day racism, or they're subjected to heightened surveillance and victimization by law enforcement. There's a study by the Williams Institute that found that substantial evidence that LGBT individuals and communities continue to face profiling, discrimination, and harassment at the hands of law enforcement officers. And so I encourage everyone, if you will go to the Williams Institute website, there's plenty of reports they've done on HIV criminalization in states like Georgia, California, I feel like I'm forgetting one. I want to say Florida, which are eye-opening, very helpful tools, but also about LGBTQ experiences around criminalization. So I strongly encourage you to go to Williams Institute website to look at those resources. It's really good data there. And also, I wanted to point out there's, the experiences that the lack of dialogue among HIV negative and HIV positive gay and bisexual and same gender loving men, and I'm using men because as a Black gay man, my experience is just emphasizing that. But of course, this could be in any type of sort of dynamic of relationships. Yeah, so this lack of dialogue, people really having open discussions. And notice I didn't say honest, I said open discussions, because it's not safe for people legally to disclose their status. I think we all should understand that at this point, but I'm sure some people, depending on how they feel, may or may not. But the point is that we should be having these open discussions like we're having this session here to discuss, or at least see what are the experiences that we have and why, why aren't people being able to have these discussions because of fear and because of criminal laws, or because of just the things that we experience, the oppression that we experience on a daily basis. And sometimes people's HIV is either the last thing or it's the first thing on their mind that they're constantly having to deal with as they navigate life. And so a lot of times things that are happening in life makes it hard to really have the serious discussions about the things that are really important, that are high priority in one's life. And so we need to have continue to have more dialogue among HIV negative, HIV positive um, folks. One, just to bring awareness, and two, to have a better understanding of what our experiences are. A lot of people who are feel that they are not HIV, well, that know that they're not HIV positive, may feel like these laws are necessary to hold people living with HIV accountable. And there's a lot to be said there, but I feel like a lot of times some of those people who have no understanding of HIV or the experiences don't know enough to understand what the experiences are. Um, and so I could go on in that, but again, just a lack of dialogue that we need to continue to do more of, have more dialogue. Next slide. All right. There's also the possibility of distrust in the health system due to breach of confidentiality or carceral public health strategies, as I sort of alluded to earlier, which can exacerbate disparities for Black and Latinos. Um, the way we prosecute, what our answer to things here in this country is that we prosecute people. We call the police, which many of us have learned is a form of violence, which I definitely agree. But I feel like punitive responses are never the best answer to a lot of things that can be handled in the way that they should be handled. If we have public health's job is to support and strengthen, empower those people living with HIV, um, and to support people regardless of how they identify, for their own well-being, as well. And so a lot of people may not go through the health system simply because of the distrust and because of how the practices, the harmful practices that come with, one, not accepting the person as they are, and then two, if they happen to be living with HIV, how they can be treated in that way, or mistreated rather. There are legal vulnerabilities based on the HIV status. So for the experiences that for this group of people, is they're unaware of how to negotiate disclosure of behaviors that make them liable. Just because a person is diagnosed HIV positive, may have been living with HIV for a number of years, may not always mean that they can easily disclose their status. That is real. That is real. Unaware of outdated felony laws, which I mentioned, unfair representation in court, face lengthy prison sentences, and as I alluded to earlier, sex offender registry requirements. And it's already hard enough being Black, being gay, and living with HIV, and then now you're thrown into the criminal legal system, and now you don't have money to be affording a lawyer or paying for fees and fines. And so it just subjected you to more oppression, more disparities, and more disadvantage and disenfranchisement. Um, and I think many people have no idea of what that feels like or what that looks like until you really have gone through it or known someone who's dealing with those things to understand how of a dark place that can be and how the difficulties um, one face every day, even including their mental health. So it's not just a matter of putting someone away, but like, what does that mean? And also the bigger message, what does that send? What kind of message does that send to our community? Is this how we want to be treated? Is this how we want the white supremacy to treat us as a Black culture? It's things that we need to really, really think about, and not further perpetuate the oppression that is already beset our community. And here we go, perpetuating and doing it over again to each other. We're not getting anywhere with that. And I think that's why we have this racial awakening right now in this country, because people are waking up to realize like, oh, some things are just not right. All laws are not good laws. So that's just my little soapbox. I can go on and on, but disenfranchisement and collateral consequences are there, prohibiting people from accessing employment, housing, education, and other benefits or opportunities. And I'm here to tell you people that it's not easy. It is not easy trying to restore yourself simply if you have a record or if you're in a position where, or a state that doesn't provide expanded Medicaid or anything like that for you to be able to access what you need in order to live and thrive. They do everything to arrest you and move your rights, but little is done to ever restore you back to a place that you can be productive and make it on your own. And as a person living with HIV, that just makes it, that can be complicated. And my last point here is we talk about how HIV/AIDS is a death sentence, but conviction becomes a life sentence, because that's something that you constantly deal with every day of your life. And I'm a witness to that, that it's hard. It is really, really hard. And we're people too. And everyone deserves to live with dignity, regardless if they have, if they're a person that's formerly incarcerated, if they're personally with HIV, if they're a Black person, they're man or woman, you know, however they identify, whatever, like people deserve to have dignity, and the convictions does not make it easy to live in this country and thrive. Next slide. So I wanted to, talking about HIV criminalization and sort of the experiences of people, you know, what is HIV criminalization? What does it look like? Possibly what does it feel like? I wanted to give you sort of this list of what an ideal modernized law possibly could look like, or what does it mean if you have not sort of deciphered that yourself based on what I've said so far. A modernized statute would ideally do the following. It would include scientifically accurate information regarding HIV transmission, instead of being it based on fear and what some folks who are not living with HIV think they know about HIV and the people that are living with it, or what they think they know about queer people. You know, we need to have accurate information, and that's important. Mandate proof of intent to transmit HIV in line with other similar statutes. Now, there are other STIs that are on the books. However, HIV is the only one that's signaled out and given like this harsh, crazy, you know, punitive action, right? So we require that we mandate proof of intent, meaning that someone is going, it has transmitted HIV, then we need proof to know that they actually did that, and not just it be just based on assumption or what have you. Remove this charge from a sexual offense registry, which I think speaks for itself. Reduce this charge to a misdemeanor offense. I say this point really is again, is where I was talking about earlier about negotiation and debates and things like that. You know, some people feel strongly about having something in place, like something to, and I totally get that. And that can definitely be for a whole separate discussion too, to sort of explain, go through those nuances of like what that means and what that could look like. So fortunately in this country, we've been able to move some of those felony laws to misdemeanor offenses, just as, again, to have something in place, but then also to sort of require prosecutors to do their due diligence and, you know, checking to make sure that, you know, looking at intent or mens rea, which is a legal term, to determine, you know, was this something that was intentional? You know, of course, felonies can be, it's hard to move a felony to a misdemeanor, but with the misdemeanor can be downgraded to like a violation or something like that. So there's different ways to play this, but I won't like go deeper into that. But this is kind of ideally what we want to look at, because misdemeanors aren't necessarily charged that much. But if they are, we don't want it to be to the weight, have the weight as if of a felony. So people can kind of get around a misdemeanor, but a felony, not so much. Retroactively remove anyone on sexual offender registry. Again, so not just looking at the law for the future, but also reaching back and saying, hey, those people that are on the registry, we want them off, you know, as it relates to this law. Because some states, they won't go back, but we need them to go back. Remove disclosure requirement. Again, that can be, debatable in states as well, in order to sort of reach a deal with modernizing law. So these things are not easy. Some of the stuff is not easy to, but you go in to try to negotiate that as best as you possibly can. Again, we want people to legally disclose their status. We need to make it legally safe for them to do so. And right now it's not, but that's why we need to remove the disclosure requirement. Include language explaining that not using condoms or not having an undetectable viral load doesn't mean intent to transmit, because many of us should know that, you know, everybody's body is different, and some of us may reach an undetectable level quickly. Some of us, it may take some time. And just because you don't use a condom or have not reached an undetectable viral load does not mean you're trying to transmit HIV to anyone. Or and then also we have, again, there's other alternatives that are there if you want to prevent HIV, like PrEP and such. On that point, transmission must occur for conviction. And so that we're not just throwing people in prison because they're living with HIV. We need to know that transmission has taken place. And then I think we could look at this and deal with this in a different kind of way. But as I said earlier, in most of these instances, HIV has not been transmitted. And so, yeah, so I want to share with you just sort of what ideal modernized law could look like, and what some of the laws might look like if you're living in a state that has recently changed their law. And if you like read the language or something, you might be like, oh, okay, they don't, you know, they say this, or they decided to do, you know, to do something that you may see here on this list, so you kind of know where it came from. That these are things that we kind of thought about as the ideal law. Of course, if a law can be repealed, oh, that is the greatest thing in the world. We prefer repeal over anything, honestly. But you know, in today's society, we get as far as we can get, and these are some of the things that we are thinking about as we are considering modernizing. Next slide. I can't remember what the next slide is, but. Oh, organization and partners becoming active ally. I changed the word stronger to active because we got to be active in the 21st century. It is critical. Critical means action. It's critical for us to be active. And so what that could look like for your organizations or your departments is to improve development of cultural competence in the organization. This is my own little spin to it, because many people, we talk about Black people, we talk about other cultures or what have you, but do we really know about our culture? You know, do we know about ourselves, based on our racial identity or whatever identity you have? Do you know a lot about it other than just living it? But do you know a lot about yourself and how you, and what positioning you have in this country, in your state, in your community, as that person, as a Black man or as a queer person, or personally with HIV? Do you really understand the history? And so we have to look at just beyond our race. We have to look at as a history of people living with HIV, whatever, history of our queer and gay history. Like, we need to know these things and how we are looked at in sort of the bigger picture. Integrate racial justice into organization and political strategies. I've been a part of some great groups, and we've been, you know, this is things that we live by, and I can see it in our work that we're trying to do. You know, right now, if you're all about what's going on in the country with police brutality, it's all about racial justice. You're probably doing some racial justice work and don't realize it. But this is important, that what needs to be integrated into our organization and political strategy. So if your organization is not talking racial justice, then you might want to mention it, like, hey, this is what we need to be looking at. Increase accountability to the communities we lead or we serve. If your organization, again, focusing on the communities that are impacted, talking racial justice, in increasing your accountability by doing what you say you're going to do, or doing what your community needs you to do, and holding yourself accountable as well as each other. Centering communities most impacted by the epidemic in leadership and decision making. Can't stress that enough. We need more people of color, Black people, leading and making decisions about what's happening to them and our communities. ensure equity around allocation of resources, that's human capital, materials, and financial, making sure that, there are plenty of grants and things that are sort of floating out there to support um, work, especially around racial justice. And so it's like we need to get in on that and bring that in and use those resources to help strengthen our communities. Work to transform and, where necessary, dismantle institutions that uphold white supremacy and compromise the well-being of communities of colors, which I think speaks for itself. Next slide. So I wanted to highlight the communities and the coalitions that exist. So those things that I just mentioned on the next slide, these are things that I know that these entities are doing or striving to do. HIV is Not a Crime Training Academy happened earlier last month. It's a grassroots decriminalization movement. I can't stress enough to, participate if you haven't. Google all of this stuff that I have on here. I'm sorry, I don't have websites, but you can definitely Google and find information about the training academy. It's led by 4 people living with HIV, but not only that, communities of people living with HIV or Black communities of color. That's what I'm trying to say. Community of colors who are leaders and people living with HIV. They are now part of the planning for the HINEC. And I have to tell you, they've been great for the past 2 or 3 that we've done so far. This is the 4th installment. So I think they're going to be planning for the next one in 2023, if I'm not mistaken. Black United Leadership Initiative network is dear to my heart. It is a network of Black activists dedicated to building a Black-led response to HIV criminalization and other forms of criminalization that impact Black people. And so that is something that arises out of the HINAC, or HIV is Not a Crime Training Academy. And so I encourage you to join our network. We are still active, and it's a great group of people that I would not expect to be a part of doing this work around HIV criminalization. I just love that building a Black-led response to HIV criminalization, because we know who it impacts and how it impacts our community, and who best to know is the Black people. And so we need to be leading and again, part of decision making about what happens to us. Another initiative that I want to highlight is the Health Not Prisons Collective, which is intersectional initiatives. These are the organizations that are doing that work. You can find information about the Health Not Prisons Collective online, probably through the Positive Women's Network. I think they have it hosted on their website. It explains what each organization or entity is, their goal, or what they're leading with. And so they're doing a lot of different activities on HIV criminalization in general, but just also in partnership as a collective. And then, of course, there's the HIV Justice Network, which I am a part of as an advisor on the Global Advisory Panel, which is a network of HIV criminalization advocates worldwide. And so I just say, understand that you may be a part of something here in the US, but you're also part of something bigger across the world. And so I'm also learning about the impact of HIV criminalization in other parts of the world, like in Africa, or just in Europe, and I think Russia and the other countries that have high prosecution numbers. Yeah, so if you are curious about HIV Justice Network, or you can definitely reach out to me. They also do a global scan of where HIV criminalization happens in other parts of the world. So there's a whole database out there that you can access these things from. So these are tools and that resources that have been building up for a number of years. And so it's just great to have a home, not only here in the US, but also worldwide in terms of this issue. So next slide. All right, and that last is my contact and social media. You can feel free to reach out to me by phone or email, or you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. And my Twitter will be beefing up soon. Now, hopefully now I have some more time to tweet out a lot of things. And so I want to thank Black AIDS Institute, as well as What's in the Mirror, for this opportunity. And thank you for the consideration. And I appreciate you constantly lifting up this issue within our Black community. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. And for all our participants, make sure that you get the information that's on this slide. If you want to definitely contact Robert for more information around this subject. So we have a few more minutes left, and we definitely want to get into the Q&A portion. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to the Q&A section, Robert, and ask you a few questions that we received and see what we can answer for them.
Okay.
So from our first question we got, so for my clear understanding, people living with HIV has to be registered as a sex offender.
You may have to. It just depends on which state you are in. Not all states require that, but there are certain states that do. So the key word is may. You may have to do that. I had to do it in Louisiana, which I'm not surprised because just the nature and culture of Louisiana, you know, any way they can get you on the hook, they will do it. But there are at least 6 states that do require it. And maybe 5 now if the laws change in certain states, but you may have to. It's not, it just depends on which state you're in.
Okay. So our next question is, so if people living with HIV are undetectable, do they still have to disclose their status?
You know, that is a good question. I think I've heard, I don't know all the laws in the different states, even the ones that have changed. I do know there one particular state that if you don't have to disclose your status, if you know that you're undetectable. I can't remember which state that is, but these are things that are negotiated. And so I don't want to just like give a blank answer, but I do know that there are at least one state that I remember that you do not have to disclose your status, but you'll have to read more on what that state is. And if you are curious about it, I can find out what that state is, and so that you have the accurate information. But I do know that that has been said, but I'm not sure. I don't believe that that's being applied in all the other states. And I feel like it's maybe certain states that may do that. But as of right now, you do have to disclose your status. So that's why we're trying to do the work to address those issues.
Okay. And so our next question starts off with devil's advocate, but the question is, would it be better if we had laws that were amended and specific to, one, intentional transmission, very hard to prove; two, if prevention harm reduction was used, then it could not be intentional; and three, if status was disclosed, then it's a shared responsibility. So it's kind of giving a model of an ideal laws amendment to the laws that's on the book.
Yeah, I would say, you know, that is something worth discussing. Again, these are state by state, so I can't say, oh, that's what should be done. Because people, and I know these are kind of how these discussions started out in the beginning, but for me, I look at it that it doesn't matter how you talk about HIV. Some people, the folks in power or even within our community, they're going to think the way they think about it, and you can put all the different sort of ideas out there that are good, and so they'll be like, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, it doesn't matter what you, because some people just feel like HIV is just so awful, that, you know, people need to be held accountable. And I agree, there should definitely be some accountability, but it's not as easy. It's easier said than done. But what you're proposing here are definitely some logical, sound very logical. And when coalitions are having discussions, especially with themselves, with the community, or with those legislators, these are the type of ideas that are thrown out there. And so I can't just say like, oh yeah, this is kind of how we should think about it. But I will say what you have proposed are definitely things that are talked about within those coalitions.
Okay, next, do you feel comfortable with telling the length of your sentence and jail time?
Yes. I initially, when I was convicted, I was given a probated sentence. And I know this may sound complicated to a lot of people. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, did that really happen? So I was given a probated sentence. And when I had to approach the probation office, And so when I did, the probation officer told me, it was only then that I learned that I had to register as a sex offender. And I was like, oh, um, I didn't know that. My attorney didn't mention it to me, nor did the court. And so I had to do it right then. Otherwise, I would have violated myself and, have to be subjected to prison. So I was on probation as well as on the registry. And so my attorney filed motions to address the registry issue. And when she did, the court says, oh, yes, you do have to register still, but you have to also go to prison. So I think the court messed up somewhere, when in terms of how they sentenced me initially, because I ended up now being sentenced to 6 months in prison and during hard time. And why 6 months? I generally say I didn't know, but I think now it's because I was already out looking at a year in the probated sentence. So I guess to them, um, 6 months made it 2 years or something, or I don't know. It's funny how they calculate the time or determine that. But that is what happened to me, and so I had to sort of do the process over in terms of, saying, allowing the court to accept my guilty plea, and so that they could modify the sentence and do it correctly. So yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but that is what happened to me. So I'm glad that I only got the 6 months. Um, because I don't know if any of you've ever had to turn yourself in. It's a weird feeling to turn yourself into a place that you won't be able to bring yourself out of until it's done. So
Okay. So I'm gonna pick a few more, maybe just a couple more. I think it's important to ask this one though. If you know the answer, but can Ryan White funds be used to fund people living with HIV attending the HIV is not a crime academy? I'm not sure if
can
you know
which
that.
funds?
Ryan White funds, federal funds.
Oh, I I don't I don't know. I don't know that we usually we. Oh, I guess I should explain for HiNAP what we do. We usually raise the money ourselves as a well, do the fundraising is what I'm trying to say. There's fundraising that is done. Um, so we reach out to different funders to see if they would support, this type of activity or this type of event. Thankfully, we've been fortunate. HINAC has been fortunate to get that funding and continuing to get it, at least up to this present point. So there's a lot of fundraising that goes on now. For those that work at organizations, we ask that, HINAC asks that your organization support you as an employee to come to HINAC. So whatever funds, the organization is using to get you there, or that's between the organization itself. But that specifically, I don't know the answer to that. But that's generally how funding is raised, and then we use those funds to get people to request, like submit like an application of some sort, as requesting that they want to attend, and then we use that fundraising money to support their transportation as well as their registration to come to HINAC. But the thing here is that when we raise so much money, HINAC has shifted to allow those community leaders or those people who come from various communities to select um, or provide scholarships, if you will, for those that are interested in attending. So it's not just like one entity that's determining who gets to come or whatever. It's your representation of your community selecting or providing you the scholarship to come. And of course, it's based on your scholarship. Are you doing work in the community, or how passionate are you about the issue? Like you got to show forth something, right, to get, so that you could get support in attending. So I see that
Thank you
some
for
people,
answering that.
some
Yeah.
people are answering in the chat for them. So I think they know how the Ryan White funds work. So
Yes, yes. So definitely email Robert if you have any more questions. Again, thanks for everyone attending. What's in the Mirror information, you can find it at What's in the Mirror on Facebook and Twitter and IG. But again, make sure you come next month, third Thursday, for our part 4 of our webinar. So thank you guys, and thank you, Robert, for showing us all your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you all.